Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into a topic that I think really fascinates almost everyone: success. We look at people who achieve these truly extraordinary things,
hmm
like world-class athletes, visionary entrepreneurs, maybe a Nobel laureate.
Yep.
And our first thought, it's almost instinct, right? Is that it must be down to raw talent.
Yeah, that magic ingredient.
Exactly. This like elusive inborn gift that some people just seem to have. Well, the rest of us maybe don't. But what if that's only a tiny piece of the puzzle? Or, what if that whole narrative is actually kind of misleading us,
Yeah.
steering us away from what really drives long-term achievement?
That's a huge question, isn't it? And it cuts
Yeah.
across absolutely everything. How we educate kids, how we manage people at work, even how we think about our own potential.
Right.
And that leads us straight into today's deep dive.
Hmm.
Angela Duckworth's really groundbreaking book, Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. This isn't just another self-help book. It's packed with research. It's scientifically grounded, and it really pushes back against our assumptions about what makes people succeed over the long haul.
That's a big claim, and honestly, it really resonates. The core message of Grit, it's simple on the surface, but pretty revolutionary when you dig in. It's that sustained passion and just sheer perseverance for long-term goals.
Well, they're much more important for achieving excellence than just raw talent alone. It's almost like a shortcut, to understanding why some people who maybe don't seem like the most naturally gifted at first glance, they go on to do incredible things,
Yeah.
while others who seem to have all the talent in the world sometimes, well, they just fall short.
Yeah, it shifts the question, doesn't it? From how naturally good are they to how much do they actually stick with it? How much do they push through when things get tough?
Exactly. How much do they endure? And the acclaim for this book, it's really something. It tells you how much this idea has hit home. You've got glowing endorsements from this incredibly diverse group of really high achievers and thinkers.
Like who? Give us some examples.
Well, Ed Viesturs, the amazing mountaineer, first American to climb all 14 of the world's highest peaks without oxygen. He called it masterful. A truly sane perspective that true success comes when we devote ourselves to endeavors that give us joy and purpose.
Joy and purpose, that's key.
Right. And Ariana Huffington, she echoed that same idea, the importance of joy and purpose driving that long-term commitment.
And then you've got heavy hitters like Lawrence H. Summers, former Treasury Secretary, President Emeritus at Harvard. I mean, that's serious intellectual weight.
Absolutely. And Summers said Grit was readable, compelling, and totally persuasive. He even said the ideas could transform education, management, and the way its readers live, calling it a national treasure. I mean, wow.
That's huge praise. It suggests the impact goes way beyond just, personal motivation. It's about changing systems.
Exactly. And then there's Robert Putnam, the political scientist from Harvard. He nailed the sort of empowering aspect of it. He said Duckworth shows how regular individuals who exercise self-control and perseverance can reach as high as those who are naturally talented, that your mindset is as important as your mind.
I love that. Your mindset is as important as your mind. It basically democratizes success, doesn't it? It's not just for the supposedly brilliant few. It's accessible if you cultivate the right mindset, the passion, the perseverance.
That's the core message. And understanding the author herself, Angela Duckworth, is really helpful here too.
Yeah.
She's a psychologist, yes, but her path to this research is kind of a story of grit in itself.
Yeah. How so?
Well, before the academic career, before becoming a MacArthur Fellow,
Yeah.
genius grant,
Right.
she actually taught middle school math in a really challenging urban neighborhood.
Wow. Okay. So from the classroom trenches to high-level research.
Exactly. And that dual perspective is what makes her insights so grounded. She saw these dynamics playing out with real kids day after day. It wasn't just abstract theory. It came from watching students struggle and succeed, sometimes in unexpected ways.
That makes a huge difference, doesn't it? That blend of real-world observation and rigorous science.
It's precisely why the book hits so hard. It avoids just being anecdotal, but it also avoids being, dense academic jargon. It's relatable and credible.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear then. We're going to unpack this book. We'll really get into the core arguments, look at the research she presents, the story she tells, and most importantly, pull out the practical takeaways. What can you, our listener, actually do with this information? We want to give you a really solid overview of why grit matters, how it actually works, and crucially, how you can build more of it in yourself. and maybe even help others build it too.
We're not just looking at what she found, but why it's important and how you can apply it.
Exactly. Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack the foundations of grit. Where does this whole idea even start for Duckworth?
Well, it starts really personally for her. She talks very openly about her father, who was a brilliant scientist himself. And he apparently often told her growing up that she was no genius.
Ooh, that's tough to hear from a parent.
Right. Imagine how that shapes your self-perception. And she says this really framed her early view of her own abilities. But it also seemed to light a fire under her, to prove that maybe something else mattered more than just pure intellect.
So it fueled her.
It seems like it. She even shares this, imagined conversation she had with him in her head, almost like a declaration she made to herself. She pictures saying, "Dad, you say I'm no genius. I won't argue. But let me tell you something. I'm going to grow up to love my work as much as you love yours. I won't just have a job. I'll have a calling. When I get knocked down, I'll get back up. I may not be the smartest person in the room, but I'll strive to be the grittiest."
Wow. That's incredibly powerful and so personal. It shows this whole quest to understand grit came from deep within her own experience.
Absolutely. And then that personal feeling got powerfully reinforced when she became a teacher. Standing in that 7th grade math classroom in that tough neighborhood, she saw something that just didn't fit the standard script.
What was that?
She noticed that some of her quick studies, the kids who seemed naturally talented, who pick things up really fast,
Yeah.
they didn't always do that well in the long run. The grades might be okay, maybe even good sometimes, but not consistently great. Maybe they'd bomb a cumulative test. But then she saw other kids.
The ones who struggled initially.
Exactly, the ones who found it hard. But they were the ones taking meticulous notes, always asking questions, staying after school for help, just relentlessly trying. And those kids often became her overachievers.
So the effort, the persistence actually mattered more than the initial speed of learning.
That was the huge aha moment for her. This clear disconnect between apparent talent and actual sustained achievement. It was this puzzle, this mystery that made her leave teaching and go into psychology. She wanted to scientifically figure out why some people stick with things and succeed, while others who look more gifted on paper, well, they don't.
And it wasn't just a hunch, she saw it day in, day out. Okay, so that personal drive plus the classroom observations led her into research. Where did she start looking for grit in action?
One of the first places was West Point, specifically their notorious Beast Barracks.
Beast Barracks. Sounds intense.
Oh, it is. It's this incredibly grueling 7-week summer train-up program for all new cadets. Physically demanding, psychologically demanding. It's explicitly designed to, quote, find your weaknesses. And a lot of really bright, capable people just don't make it through. The dropout rate is high.
So the puzzle was predicting who would make it.
Exactly. And West Point had been trying for decades. Psychologists going back to the 50s, like Jerry Kagan, couldn't reliably predict who would quit. West Point had this really sophisticated score, the whole candidate score.
Right, you mentioned that. SATs, grades, leadership, fitness.
All of it. Weighted average. Great for identifying potential, who could do well. But it consistently failed to predict who would actually persevere through Beast. There was a gap between the metrics and the reality.
Okay, so what did Duckworth find? What was the breakthrough?
Working with the military psychologist, Mike Matthews, she found the answer was remarkably clear. What matters is grit. She developed her grit scale. It's a pretty straightforward questionnaire measuring passion and perseverance for long-term goals. And that scale turned out to be the single best predictor of who completed Beast Barracks.
Better than the whole candidate score.
Better than the whole candidate score. Better than any other traditional measure of talent or potential they looked at. It was really compelling evidence that this combination of passion and perseverance was crucial, maybe even paramount, in a super high-stakes environment.
Wow. Okay, that's powerful. But does it apply outside of, intense military training?
Great question. And Duckworth wanted to know that, too. So she looked at another field famous for high attrition and constant challenge, sales.
Oh, yeah. Dealing with rejection day in, day out, that takes grit.
Definitely. So she gave her grit scale and other personality tests to hundreds of new salespeople at a company. 6 months later, she went back. An incredible 55% of those salespeople had quit.
Half of them, wow.
Yeah. And again, grit, as measured by her scale, was the best predictor of who stayed and who left. What's really striking is that other traits you might think would predict success in sales, like being extroverted or emotionally stable, or even just generally conscientious and diligent, none of them were as good at predicting retention as grit was.
So it's really about that ability to just keep going, even when you're getting knocked down constantly.
That seems to be a huge part of it, that persistence in the face of setbacks. Okay, so we have West Point, we have sales. This evidence starts building a strong case. But it also bumps up against this bigger issue you mentioned earlier, our societal bias towards talent.
Right, the tendency to just label high achievers as naturals.
Exactly. We rush to anoint people, as Duckworth puts it. We see a brilliant musician, a scientist making breakthroughs, an Olympic champion, and the story we tell ourselves is often, wow, they're just so naturally gifted, like it was easy for them.
And this isn't new, right? You mentioned Darwin and Galton.
Right, there's a history here. Francis Galton, Darwin's cousin, a child prodigy himself, he argued high achievement was this mix of unusual ability plus exceptional zeal and capacity for hard labor. Darwin, interestingly, initially thought effort was almost everything. He wrote to Galton, "Excepting fools, men did not differ much in intellect, only in zeal and hard work."
So Darwin was more team effort initially.
Pretty much. Though he later kind of conceded to Galton that ability played a role too. But he still heavily emphasized the effort part. So this debate, this tension between innate talent and hard work, it's been around for a long time.
And it still affects us today, maybe in ways we don't even realize, like that naturals bias research.
Oh, absolutely. Che-Gang Se's research is fascinating here. She found that musicians, if you ask them directly, what's more important, talent or effort? They'll usually say effort. They know practice matters.
Okay, makes sense.
When she tested their attitudes indirectly, this bias popped up. She gave them identical descriptions of two pianists, the only difference. One was labeled a natural, born with talent. The other was a striver, high motivation, worked really hard. Then she played them recordings of the exact same performance attributed to each pianist.
What happened?
They consistently rated the natural as more likely to succeed and, crucially, more hireable, even though the music was identical.
Whoa. So just the label of being a natural changed their perception.
Completely. And think about the implications. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If people think you're a natural, you get more attention, maybe better coaching, higher expectations.
Which then helps you succeed, reinforcing the idea that you were just talented all along.
Exactly. Even though immense effort is almost always involved behind the scenes. Duckworth points out that Say herself, the researcher who is musically talented, still practiced 4 to 6 hours a day. Even the naturals are usually working incredibly hard. We just don't always see it, or we discount it because of the talent label.
We see this in the corporate world too, right? Duckworth mentioned McKinsey.
Yeah, she shared her own experience there. McKinsey, the big consulting firm, apparently relied heavily on SAT scores for initial sorting of candidates. Kind of suggests a talent above all else vibe, doesn't it?
Definitely. Prioritizing that initial marker of potential.
She tells this funny story about an interview where they asked her some complex mental math question. And she basically said, I just call someone who knows the answer.
And they hired her.
Apparently, they were fine with it. It implied her high SAT score was what really got her in the door, not necessarily needing to be a human calculator on the spot.
And then there was that story about Scott, the student rejected from Carnegie Mellon.
Right. Stellar grades, great extracurriculars, but lower SAT scores kept him out of a top cognitive science program. And that experience actually motivated him to study intelligence because he felt so strongly that what you actually achieve should matter more than some standardized test score predicting potential.
So these examples really show how institutions can sometimes get hung up on this narrow idea of talent, maybe overlooking people who have demonstrated real achievement through effort. It makes you wonder, are companies and schools missing out on gritty high achievers because they overvalue those initial scores?
It's a really important question for any organization, I think. Okay, so if talent isn't the whole story, how do we think about achievement? This brings us to Duckworth's core formula, the effort counts twice idea.
Right. The simple view is just talent, achievement, like a straight line.
Yeah, that's the myth. Duckworth breaks it down differently, more accurately, I think. Two steps. First, talent x effort equals skill.
Okay, so talent times effort gets you skill. Makes sense. Talent helps you learn faster, maybe, but you still need the effort to build the actual skill.
Precisely. Talent is the rate at which your skill improves when you put in effort. High talent, zero effort. Zero skill. Effort is the multiplier.
Got it. And the second part?
The second part is skill x effort equals achievement.
So effort comes in again.
Exactly. Effort counts twice. Once to build a skill, and then again to use that skill productively to actually achieve something. You can be incredibly skilled, But if you don't put in the effort to perform, to produce, to do the work, well, your achievement stays low.
So effort is like this amplifier at both stages. It builds the skill and it makes the skill productive. That's actually really empowering, isn't it? It means even if you feel you're not the most talented person, your effort can make a massive difference because it's working for you in two ways.
Totally. It's the lever you always have control over. And she gives great examples. Think about Will Smith.
Yeah, the actor, musician, huge career.
Right. And he's famously said, I've never really viewed myself as particularly talented. Where I excel is ridiculous, sickening work ethic. His success story, Duckworth says, is very much about going the distance. It's about sustained effort over decades.
He definitely embodies that.
Or think historically, like Washington Irving, the author of Sleepy Hollow. He wasn't some overnight genius. He became a masterful and prolific writer through sheer daily effort, the consistent habit of writing, refining, practicing his craft. And that mastery, built through effort, produce stories that still resonate today.
So it's the consistent application, day after day.
Mm-hmm. And connecting this to life overall, she mentions that Harvard treadmill test from the 1940s. They weren't just measuring physical fitness. They called it a test of stamina and strength of will. They knew pushing through physical limits had a mental component.
Interesting. And there was a follow-up.
Yeah, 30 years later, George Vaillant tracked down these same guys. And the ones who showed more stamina and strength of will on that treadmill decades earlier, they had better psychological adjustment as adults.
Wow. So that ability to push through, that grit, it predicted long-term well-being.
It seems so. The takeaway is pretty clear. Effort matters hugely, not just for specific goals, but for navigating the marathon of life. It's about endurance, not just sprints.
Which brings us to maybe the most hopeful part of the book. This idea that grit isn't fixed. You're not just born with a certain amount.
Exactly. That's one of the most powerful messages. Duckworth argues very strongly that grit can be grown, it can be cultivated, strengthened, developed over time. And she identifies 4 key psychological assets, these sort of internal pillars, that are crucial for growing grit from the inside out.
Okay, what are they?
They are interest, practice, purpose, and hope. And importantly, they're not separate things. They're interconnected. They build on each other.
All right, let's break those down. Pillar 1. Interest. We hear follow your passion all the time, right? Especially in commencement speeches.
All the time. Will Shortz, Jeff Bezos, lots of successful people say it. But Duckworth points out a big problem with that advice.
Which is?
Well, what if you don't have a passion yet, especially when you're young? Telling someone to follow something they haven't found yet can be kind of paralyzing, even demoralizing.
Yeah, I can see that. So what's her take?
She reframes it. Instead of follow your passion, she says we should aim to foster a passion. And the book explains how that actually happens. It's usually a gradual process, not some instant discovery.
Okay, fostering, not following. And why is finding that interest so important for grit?
Well, the research is really clear. People are just enormously more satisfied with jobs that align with their interests. It leads to happier lives, sure. But crucially for grit, it makes it easier to persevere. Because the work itself feels rewarding, you're intrinsically motivated. You want to stick with it, even when it gets hard.
So the why is clear. Interest fuels persistence. But how does this fostering actually work? You said it's not usually a light bulb moment.
Right. Most gritty people she studied didn't have some dramatic movie-like moment where they found their calling. Instead, they often spent years, maybe even decades, just exploring different things, trying stuff out, slowly figuring out what clicked. Barry Schwartz has a great analogy. Finding a passion is like finding a partner. Finding them is just the start. Then you have to develop the relationship, deepen it over time.
Okay, so it's an active development process. How do you kickstart that? How do you develop interest?
Early encouragement is huge. Benjamin Bloom's research on top performers found that their first teachers or mentors were often really warm and supportive. And made the initial learning feel pleasant and rewarding, almost like play. That positive association is key.
Makes sense. What else?
Autonomy. Letting kids and adults make choices about what they explore. When you feel forced into something, that intrinsic motivation just evaporates. That's why, as Duckworth says, overbearing parents and teachers erode intrinsic motivation. You kill the spark if you try to control it too much.
Right, gotta let it breathe. Okay, so you spark an interest maybe through encouragement and autonomy. How do you deepen it over time? How do you keep it going?
That's where the nature of interest changes. For beginners, novelty is just anything new. But psychologist Paul Sylvia found that for experts, novelty becomes about nuance. digging deeper, finding finer distinctions, tackling more complex problems within the same field.
Like Sir John Templeton's motto, the more I know, the less I understand. You find more questions the deeper you go.
Exactly. It's about embracing that complexity. And this connects directly to the Japanese idea of Kaizen continuous improvement, resisting that feeling of, okay, I'm good enough now, that plateau of arrested development. All the grit paragons Duckworth studied had this Kaizen mindset. They were never satisfied. They were always pushing to get better.
Like the journalist Hester Lacey found interviewing those mega successful people, they always wanted the next thing to be better.
Precisely. Even if they were already at the top of their game. Like a writer wanting every book I do to be better than the last.
Yeah.
And think about Jane Golden, who founded Mural Arts Philadelphia. She started as a painter, but her interest evolved. She found new challenges, even novelty, in navigating the bureaucratic red tape needed to make large public art projects happen. Her purpose deepened her interest in unexpected ways.
That's a great transition to the second pillar, practice. Because just being interested isn't enough, right? You have to do the work.
Absolutely. And again, we often romanticize greatness. We see an amazing performance and think talent. But research like Dan Chambliss's study of Olympic swimmers, or even Nietzsche's thoughts on craftsmanship, shows something different. Superlative performance is usually built from dozens of small skills, carefully drilled into habit. It's often mundane, repetitive work behind the scenes.
Which leads us to Anders Ericsson's concept of deliberate practice. This is crucial, isn't it?
It's absolutely central. Experts don't just practice more. They practice differently. It's not about mindlessly logging hours. It's about the quality of those hours.
Okay, so what makes practice deliberate?
A few key things. First, setting specific stretch goals, things just outside your current ability. Second, focusing laser-like on your specific weaknesses, not just doing what you're already good at. Third, intentionally seeking challenges you can't yet meet. You have to constantly push your limits.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Olympic swimmer Rowdy Gaines would always try to beat myself in practice sets, pushing his times. Violet's Roberto Diaz talks about actively working to find your Achilles heel, identifying and attacking your weakest points.
And this kind of practice, it's hard work, right? It's not fun necessarily.
It's supremely effortful, as Erickson puts it, often exhausting. He found top performers can usually only manage about an hour of intense, deliberate practice before needing a break, maybe 3 to 5 hours total in a day. And importantly, it's not the same as flow, that feeling of effortless absorption.
Oh, interesting. How is it different?
Well, the spelling champ, Carrie Close, said she only felt flow when she wasn't being challenged. Deliberate practice is, by definition, challenging and often uncomfortable. You're pushing yourself where you're weak. But Close also said it's gratifying in its own way. You get the deep satisfaction of knowing you're actually improving.
So it's about the quality, not just the quantity, like that Danish rower who saw the Japanese team burning out.
Exactly. Mads Rasmussen saw them putting in tons of hours, but it was brute force exhaustion, not focused, high-quality, thoughtful training goals. They were working hard, but not smart. Noah Kageyama at Juilliard found that when he actually started applying deliberate practice principles himself, even later in his training, his skill and enjoyment skyrocketed.
So what's the practical takeaway here for, us regular folks? How can we use deliberate practice?
Well, Duckworth mentioned studies where teaching students these principles led them to actively focus on your weaknesses, concentrate better, choose practice over distraction, and their grades improved. So for you, it means when you're trying to learn something new, a skill at work, an instrument, anything, don't just go through the motions. Actively identify what you're bad at, set a specific goal to improve that one thing, focus intensely, and get feedback. It's uncomfortable, but that's where the real learning happens.
Makes sense. Okay, pillar number 3, purpose. This seems really important for sustaining grit long term.
Hugely important. Duckworth notes that while you could technically have a gritty villain focused only on themselves, the vast majority of the truly gritty people she studied had a clear sense of positive, altruistic purpose. Their biggest goals were connected to helping others or making the world better in some way.
It gives them a bigger why, right? Beyond just personal success.
Exactly. Amy Rosniski's research on the job, career, calling framework is super relevant here. Remember that.
Yeah, a job is just for money. A career is for advancement. But a calling, that's work that feels intrinsically meaningful and contributes to the greater good.
Right. And people who see their work as a calling, they are significantly grittier, much more satisfied with their jobs and lives, and they even take fewer sick days. So that sense of purpose provides this deep well of motivation and resilience. It's a powerful why.
Do you have examples of this, like people finding purpose in unexpected places?
Definitely. There's Roy Schmidt, the 58-year-old garbage collector.
Mm.
Not exactly a glamorous job, right?
Mm.
But he saw it as deeply meaningful to society, contributing to public health. That sense of purpose sustained him. Or think of the classic bricklayer parable.
Oh, yeah, the three bricklayers.
Right. One says, I'm laying bricks. The second says, I'm building a wall. But the third says, I'm building the house of God. Same action, totally different level of purpose. And Wisniewski points out that a calling isn't necessarily something you just find. It's often something you develop. It's dynamic.
How does that development happen?
Look at Joe Leader, the transit engineer. He started just liking trains. Then he got interested in the planning aspect. Then he saw it as a career. Eventually, it became his life philosophy, serving the public, building something lasting. He was so committed he'd work on drawings at the laundromat.
Wow, that's dedication fueled by purpose.
Or Michael Bain, the doctor at Penn. It took him years to figure out how to integrate his personal interest in mindfulness with his professional purpose of helping patients. Eventually, it clicked, and he felt he was doing what he was put on this planet to do. These things often take time and conscious effort to connect interest with purpose.
Duckworth talks about her own journey too, right? Starting that summer program, then teaching, then finally finding her calling in using psychology to help kids thrive.
Exactly. It was an evolution. And what's also interesting is how self-interest and other-oriented purpose can actually work together. They're not always separate. Well, one study found teens who had both personal goals, like getting good grades for themselves, and other-oriented goals, like making parents proud, found school more meaningful. Or think about Kat, the restaurant worker. She wanted tips and was curious, self-oriented, but she also genuinely wanted to be helpful, other-oriented. That mix drove her to learn everything and become a trainer. Personal gain and purpose can fuel each other.
Okay, that brings us to the fourth pillar, hope. This isn't just wishful thinking, is it?
Not at all. Duckworth defines it as a kind of rising to the occasion perseverance. It's about learning to keep going even when things are difficult, even when we have doubts. It's the belief that your efforts can make a difference, that you can improve.
And this connects to that famous learned helplessness research.
Directly. Seligman and Mayer's dog experiments back in the 60s. Remember, the dogs who couldn't escape the shocks just gave up later, even when they could escape. They'd learned helplessness.
Yeah, that's such a stark image.
But the crucial part was that about a third of the dogs didn't give up. They stayed resilient. And that led Seligman to study learned optimism in humans. The key difference. Optimists tend to see setbacks as temporary and specific. I didn't study enough for this test. Pessimists see them as permanent and pervasive. I'm just stupid.
And that interpretation makes all the difference in whether you try again.
Absolutely. Your mindset, how you explain failure to yourself, dictates whether you have the hope to persevere. And this isn't just internal. It has real-world effects. That Teach for America study found optimistic teachers were grittier, happier, and their students actually learned more. The teacher's hopefulness rubbed off.
Which leads right into Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset versus fixed mindset. This feels central to hope.
Totally central. Growth mindset is the belief that your abilities aren't carved in stone. You can develop them through effort, good strategies, and learning from setbacks. Fixed mindset is the opposite, believing your talent is fixed. If you have a fixed mindset, failure feels like proof you just don't have it.
So you're less likely to try again after failing.
Much less likely. You think, why bother? I'm just not good at this. Whereas someone with a growth mindset thinks, okay, that didn't work. What can I try differently? I need to put in more effort. Dweck showed you can actually teach kids this growth mindset, retraining how they attribute failure.
And this plays out in organizations too, like those fixed mindset versus growth mindset companies.
Big time. Fixed mindset cultures often had employees feeling only stars were valued, maybe cutting corners. Growth mindset cultures fostered more trust, innovation, risk-taking, because failure wasn't seen as the end of the world, but as part of learning.
Duckworth even suggests naming your inner fixed mindset voices, right? Like controlling Claire.
Yeah, it's a technique to externalize and manage those self-limiting beliefs. And there's even neurobiology behind this. Steve Mayer found rats who learned they had control over challenges became biologically more resilient. Hope changes your brain.
The personal stories really drive it home too, like Bill, the rower who wasn't a natural but fell in love with the effort. Or Kayvon, the student struggling with math who just decided, I'm going to apply all the grit I have. That decision comes from hope.
Exactly. It all feeds into this virtuous cycle. A growth mindset fuels optimistic self-talk, which leads to perseverance, which reinforces the growth mindset. These four pillars, interest, practice, purpose, hope, they work together to build grit from the inside. It's really a system. What stands out to you about how they connect?
I think it's that they're all things you can actively work on. Interest isn't just found, it's fostered. Practice isn't just ours, it's deliberate. Purpose can be cultivated, hope can be learned. It puts the power back in your hands. Okay, so that's growing grit from the inside out. What about the outside influences? How does our environment shape our grit?
This is part 3 of the book, Cultivating Grit from the Outside In. And it's just as important. Our surroundings, our relationships, the cultures we're part of, they play a massive role.
Starting with parenting. You mentioned the contrast between old school strictness, like John Watson back in the 20s.
Right. Never hug and kiss them. Very different times.
And modern examples like Steve Young, whose dad wouldn't let him quit, versus Francesca Martinez, whose parents supported her dropping out, seems contradictory.
On the surface, maybe. But decades of research, especially by Larry Steinberg, points towards something called psychologically wise parenting. It's not about being just strict or just supportive. It's about being both supportive and demanding.
High standards plus high warmth.
Exactly. Setting clear expectations, holding kids accountable, but doing it with warmth, respect, and tons of emotional support. Kids raised this way consistently do better on almost every measure, including resilience and grit. It's that combination that works.
And parents are role models too, right? Kids pick up on their work ethic.
Huge factor. Bloom's studies found parents of top performers were often models of the work ethic themselves. They didn't just talk about hard work, they lived it. And kids soak that up. Plus, parents often naturally steer kids towards things they value, like music lessons if they love music.
Makes sense. Okay, beyond parents, what about mentors?
Crucial. Duckworth found pretty much every grit paragon she talked to had someone, a teacher, a coach, a boss who encouraged them at the right time, gave them confidence, pushed them to aim higher.
Like Toby Lütke, the Shopify CEO, and his programming mentor, Jürgen.
Perfect example. Jürgen saw his potential, nurtured his interest, helped him overcome challenges. That mentorship was key. And then there's the concept of wise feedback.
Ah, yes, that study with the Post-it note.
Exactly. Just adding that simple note, I'm giving you these comments because I have very high expectations and I know that you can reach them. That combination, high standards plus belief, made a huge difference in student motivation and improvement. It wasn't just praise, and it wasn't just criticism. It was both, communicated effectively.
I believe in you and I expect more. That's powerful, like Cody Coleman's math teacher who helped him shift from why bother to why not.
Yeah, those moments can be life-changing. A wise mentor can flip that switch.
Okay, what about activities outside of school or work? Extracurriculars.
Duckworth is big on this. She advocates for the hard thing rule, basically.
Oh.
Kids should commit to at least one challenging activity that interests them and stick with it for a significant period.
Why is that so important?
Well, research shows kids often feel both challenged and engaged in extracurriculars, which is a unique mix. And longitudinal studies show that sticking with an activity for 2 or more years predicts better adult outcomes, better jobs, higher earnings. Dabbling doesn't have the same effect. It's the follow-through that matters.
Like Warren Willingham's study finding that follow-through in high school activities was the best predictor of adult success.
Exactly. It didn't matter what the activity was, sports, drama, debate, what mattered was sticking with it, showing commitment, maybe advancing in it. That demonstrated grit, predicted success across the board later in life.
Duckworth even made that grit to score commitment, right? Points for years, points for advancement.
Yeah, quantifying that follow-through. And it's not just for kids. Think about Bill Gates testing applicants at Microsoft with those tedious programming tasks. He wasn't just testing coding skill, he was testing their ability to muscle through, to finish. He was testing for grit in hiring.
Okay, finally, the big one, culture. How does the culture around us affect our grit?
It's huge. Duckworth says if you're around a lot of people who are gritty, you're going to act grittier. The norms and values of the group you're in, your family, your team, your company, they shape your identity over time. Eventually, their way becomes the way I do things and why.
So conformity can actually be a good thing for grit.
In this context, absolutely. When the group standard is high effort, persistence, and resilience, it pulls everyone up. Think about Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase. He explicitly built fierce resolve and fortitude into the company culture. His manual literally says, do not let temporary setbacks become permanent excuses.
He codified grit.
Pretty much. Or Anson Dorrance, the UNC soccer coach with all those championships. His competitive cauldron culture is built on core values, half of which are explicitly about grit, don't ever quit, bring it every day. That is the culture. Being a Tar Heel means being gritty.
And Pete Carroll with the Seahawks, using competition in practice to make everyone better.
Right. The idea that your opponents, even your teammates in practice, make you stronger by challenging you. These leaders consciously design cultures that demand and cultivate grit.
It's important to remember, though, as Duckworth points out, that grit is just one part of character, right?
Definitely. Character is plural. She talks about interpersonal strengths like grit, self-control, interpersonal strengths like kindness, empathy, and intellectual strengths like curiosity. Grit is vital, but it's part of a bigger picture of being a well-rounded person.
Like Ta-Nehisi Coates, the writer, he talks constantly about failure being part of his process, that relentless trying again. That's grit, but it's combined with his incredible curiosity and intellect.
Exactly. It's that combination. Failure is inherent in writing, he says, over and over and over again. His perseverance through that is what defines his journey.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, really taking a deep dive into grit. The big takeaway seems clear. Success isn't just about talent. It's this powerful mix of passion and perseverance.
And crucially, it's not fixed. This deep dive really shows that grit is a skill, something you can actively build. It's accessible.
Let's recap the core ideas for everyone. It starts with finding and then really deepening your interest in something you want to pursue long term. Why? Because without that genuine engagement, it's almost impossible to stick with things when they get tough.
Then comes deliberate practice, focusing relentlessly on your weaknesses, pushing your limits. Why that specific focus? Because that's where real growth happens, not just repeating what's easy.
And it's fueled by purpose, connecting your efforts to something bigger than yourself, often helping others. Why is that so key? Because it provides this deep, enduring motivation that self-interest alone often can't sustain.
And it's all underpinned by hope, that growth mindset, that belief that you can improve, and that setbacks are temporary learning opportunities. Why is seeing failure that way so vital? Because it allows you to get back up and try again, instead of just quitting.
And remember the outside-in factors, too. Wise parenting, supportive mentors, giving that crucial, wise feedback.
That combo of high expectations and high belief. Why is that so important?
Yeah.
Because it tells someone, I believe in you, and I know you can do even better.
Right, and structured activities that demand follow-through and being part of a culture of grit. Why does that group culture matter? Because conformity to high standards of effort and persistence becomes internalized, shaping who you are and how you act.
It really shifts the whole conversation, doesn't it? Instead of asking, how talented is this person? We should be asking, how gritty are they? And maybe more importantly, asking ourselves, how can I become grittier?
So some concrete actions you, the listener, can take away. First, really clarify your ultimate concern, your top-level goal, your compass. Why does it matter deeply to you? That clarity fuels everything.
Second, look for ways to deepen your interests and commitment to deliberate practice in something important to you. Identify those weaknesses and actively work on them.
Third, reflect on purpose. How does what you do connect to something bigger? Can you find or cultivate that sense of calling in your work or life?
Fourth, consciously work on your mindset. When you hit a setback, challenge that pessimistic voice. Reframe it as a chance to learn. Cultivate that growth mindset.
Fifth, think about your own culture. Who are you surrounding yourself with? Can you build or join environments that value and support perseverance?
And finally, if you guide others as a parent, teacher, manager, mentor, remember wise feedback, high standards, unwavering belief. That combination is incredibly powerful.
So here's the final thought to leave you with. If effort truly counts twice, building skill and making skill productive, and if grit really can be grown from the inside out and nurtured from the outside in,
then what challenge in your life, something that maybe seemed impossible before, now feels just a little more achievable?
what hard thing will you commit to sticking with, starting today?